but this lady here will not. And I've signaled that to the industry, that this government cannot do it any further, and that we will use the Covenant of Hope speaks to the powers of government at page 26. And the powers of government don't only relate to tax and spend. And we said this to the country when we approved that document in May of 2016. Not us in here alone, but it came from the highest decision-making body of the Barbados Labour Party, which we have the honor to represent, who determined that government must become accustomed to using all of its powers, not just tax and spend, regulate, empower, a whole host of other things. And in the same way that we could go and give licenses to people from overseas to make money, we are going to use the renewable energy bounty to stabilize not just the sugar industry, to empower Bajans in their households, but also to stabilize other state-owned enterprises that deliver national public goods, so as to reduce the burden on the average Barbadian, who must then in some way find a way to help access or support those services or goods. We've also indicated that the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation cannot continue as it is. The truth is that technology has effectively made the CBC's mission difficult, almost irrelevant in some instances, because we live in a world of narrowcasting as opposed to broadcasting. Each of us will pick up our phone, pick up our computers, and watch what we want to watch, and don't have to worry about free-to-air national television. So those models cannot continue with business as usual. It is like the Goddard's Ice Factory believing that it is still relevant in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, when people get fridges and electricity. Straight talk. Straight talk. But in all of these things, whether in the agricultural sector, the RDC, Rural Development Commission, and the Urban Development Commission have to become one in a National Development Commission. And that way, we ensure that there are not two sets of separate costs for accounting departments and administrative departments and accommodation and all of those things, that we streamline it in order to focus on those aspects of national development that have left, regrettably, where some of our citizens, regrettably, have not been able to travel on the journey of development over the course of the last few decades as an independent country. So that the state-owned enterprise reform is critical if we are going to get somewhere. We then have determined, Mr. Speaker, that we have also to be able to look at the Transport Board. We already see where it is going with a number of private owners in the TAP program, the Transport Augmentation Program, which the government started before COVID. And I am aware that the Deputy Prime Minister has been meeting with the sector and has also been putting us in a position where she will continue the discussions with the unions with respect to us moving to a mass transit authority that will allow for the effective regulation of what is already predominantly a private-run sector. The last government moved the number of licenses for PSVs and taxis. You would know, Mr. Speaker, they more than doubled the numbers, saturating the market in part, but that is regrettably what we have and what we had to deal with. So that I have every confidence that we are going to be able to finish these transitions. Kensington Oval, we have to become more entrepreneurial in how we deal with it and ensure that these entities do not become a drain on the government. We've already said that we need to transition the Queen Elizabeth Hospital into a trust to allow it to better manage its affairs and to find a better way of charging us for the services rather than having a lump sum that bears no relationship to serious accountability in a way that is sustainable. And of course, we have spoken publicly about the National Insurance Board becoming an independent legal entity where it is not subject to its staff being moved within 24 hours and the kind of destabilization that it has had to endure during its life thus far. We feel that you cannot be managing that sum of money without having a totally ring-fenced, closed, and wholly independent entity that is not seen as a government department. We will continue, Mr. Speaker, to also look at strengthening our financial sector policies. Our reserves today, they're little, probably about 35 weeks now, but they went as high as 38 weeks. And the bottom line is that we are a far cry from where we were when we were potentially at 5 weeks with a $100 million loan to pay in June of 2018. We will continue. One of the things the government did was to introduce the Public Financial Management Act in 2018. We will continue to build on those gains and to strengthen also our processes across the board. It has been a process of having to train people. Clearly, COVID disrupted that as well. We are resuming because our finance officers and our accountants, whether in central government or in state-owned enterprises, have to simply do better to ensure the tightness that we need, the transparency and the accountability that we need in the management of our accounts. In addition, the country is already aware that we impose limits on ourselves, and some of those limits, we never expected a triple crisis. We planned for a single crisis, and we have reflected on it. We've not ruled it out. But if we have to make further adjustments because we are facing a triple crisis, we will do so. But for now, we will continue with all of the strictures that we have imposed on ourselves. Similarly, we have to ensure that there is a plan for the recapitalization of the central bank. We also ensure that we continue to strengthen the capacity of both the central bank and the Financial Services Commission. We're lucky, Mr. Speaker, that the Barbados financial system remains well capitalized. And the truth is that we have been reasonably lucky with respect to our ability to avoid a systemic crisis, but a lot of it comes from the quality of regulation that both the central bank and the Financial Services Commission is able to deliver. And that is why even on this whole new issue of fintech, I spoke to it last week, we are going to go forward wanting innovation, but equally ensuring that we do not displace our principles, and that is why we will go after principles-based regulation as opposed to simply rules-based regulation. Rules-based regulation will say, this is the rule, you got to catch it or not. Principles-based regulation will look and ensure that whatever we're doing, we don't offend the principles that we hold dearly. There should be no conflict of interest. We work and see whether a conflict is there. And this, therefore, admits of the creativity and the innovation that if something looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it can't be a virtual mouse. You understand? And therefore, if you're into effectively some form of security, let us regulate. And then secondly, if you are big and sophisticated, well, you could take chances and risk. But ordinary people who may not be versed in the business, do not prey upon them and do not have them invest large amounts of their own savings proportionately, such that themselves and their family literally become victims that then have to be taken care of by the rest of the country. Mr. Speaker, we continue to make progress on our anti-money laundering and counter-financial terrorism moves, but you've heard me as I gave evidence before Congress a few weeks ago. Regrettably, the one-size-fits-all prescription and the profiling is applied to us, and those are the battles that we have to face with these unfortunate blacklists and grey lists, and we will continue to fight those battles, whether it comes from the Financial Action Task Force, which deals with the money laundering and terrorism financing, or whether it comes from the OECD, which treats to it from a taxation perspective. We will continue, Mr. Speaker, to also ensure that we put in place measures to further boost the transparency and independence of our fiscal process. This Parliament would have already had before the the question of fiscal rules. We are at this point in time looking to establish an independent fiscal council that will look at all that we set out to do and what we have achieved and make an independent judgment for the people of this country and for the people of the wider world, so that we don't want to be judges in our own cause, but we will establish that independent fiscal council to ensure that we can have that judgment done. There is a new procurement bill that has been passed. It has not yet been proclaimed. The regulations are being worked upon. But as I said, procurement has to be understood in its true context, and that is why even the old procurement legislation provides for emergency access or access where there's specialized and limited services that doesn't necessarily follow the same rule. And it is still the law nevertheless, but there's a public perception that the only way to procure is public tender, when in truth and in fact, the current rules already allow for specialized and limited tender when you have 7 or less persons providing the services under Rule 232 of the current legislation, even without the new one coming in. We also, Mr. Speaker, as I said, will have to look at each SOE individually to determine what is the right balance between the services they provide, whether it should be them, whether it should be someone else, whether the fees that we are paying make sense. You know, we took a lot of lashes for carrying the transport board bus fare up to $3.50. We didn't do it because we wanted to hurt people. We did it because the transport board had not had a bus increase in over 23 years. And it therefore was not in a position to be able to fix buses, not in a position to be able to take care of its staff properly. The PSVs that the private individuals, and I said it's largely a privately driven sector, we made sure that they can now have a living and make a living from their investments. All of these things have to be done periodically, and all of us know it. There's a shopkeeper in Barbados that keep the prices of the goods at the same level, even when they're losing money. Nobody does it. And part of the difficulty, you know, the former representative for the city of Bridgestone used to say, you have to talk with the people who you represent. And I hope that one of the things we can do is to ensure that as we move beyond the 55 years as an independent nation, that we can continue to have mature discussions on a range of things, recognizing that there will not always be agreement. But in many instances, it is the discussions that allow us to know where we agree and to be able to isolate those things on which we don't agree, such that we can work together to find consensus or to persuade each other. Mr. Speaker, we will also look at enfranchisement as the corner philosophy of this government. You know, the one thing that I have spoken about, it is the thing that brought me along with pursuit of fair play and justice. The other aspect that brought me to public life is the desire to enfranchise our people. And you hear me say over and over and over, Barbadians cannot be tenants in their own land. They have to be owners. Ownership matters. And this government, as we seek to restructure and realign the public sector, will not do so in a way that prejudices ordinary Barbadians from the opportunity to a pathway to prosperity through ownership. Ownership is not cash alone. Wealth is not cash alone. Wealth is when you start to pass that from generation to generation to generation. And that has been the example that we've seen in all around us in the North Atlantic countries. And we must aspire equally to create the opportunities for ordinary Barbadians. That's why the TAP program in transport is one that we will continue to support. That is why we will create opportunities for those who work at the BAMC to be able to participate in food security and also to be shareholders, even if through the government holding a proxy for them initially until they can afford it in the new sugar factory whenever the negotiations are done. That is why in all that we do, we will engage with the trade union movement to ensure that even when we can't give the level of salary increases that we would like to give, that we give opportunities for access to ownership and empowerment and enfranchisement, and that is why the senior minister and the member for St. James Central and the member for St. James South have been given the task of getting financial literacy across this country. Bajans must know how to make money, how to save money, how to invest. And people must not be allowed to take advantage of them. And he's looking at me because he must not set his meetings to conflict with his constituency priorities. That's a side joke that for both of us smiling. The bottom line is, though, ownership matters. And in a world where people are more and more going to robotics and automated functions, it's a question of who owns the robot. That's what matters. And we have to be able to find ways of making sure that we are not left on the sidelines of the conversation or the action. And that is why this government is adamant that enfranchisement must matter. That was the philosophical principle upon which the Barbados Labour Party was formed in 1938, and it remains the philosophical principle which binds us as a country, as a party, as we manage this country. Mr. Speaker, we need also to reform how we treat the debt, and the government will publish and develop and implement a medium-term debt management strategy that will be made public. You know, all of these things are being done. All of these reforms are being done. And I don't think that we understand how complex it is to get it in the first place and how meaningful it is for us to have it. These are the things that will cause us to get back to investment grade. These are the things that will make the cost of borrowing cheaper for Barbadians. These are the things that will stop a Sagicor from relocating to Bermuda. Because if at the end of the day, the country's credit ratings remain down, the companies who are domiciled here, cannot have the benefit of a higher credit rating. And that's why it matters, Mr. Speaker. And let me come now, Mr. Speaker, to the issue of growth. And I expect the majority of members of this honourable chamber to speak to these issues of growth during the course of this debate. We believe, Mr. Speaker, that broadly, that we have to make sure that we pursue growth at a higher rate than has happened over the course of the last few decades. The truth is that our growth has been insufficient. I used to say colloquially that the gas tank ran out of gas and that Barbados has been operating on fumes for the last 20 years or so. It can't continue. And that's why I spoke earlier, asking Bajans to redouble and triple and quadruple their efforts in terms of the individual jobs that you're now doing. Do the job that you have. Don't do the job that you want, because doing the job that you want is not going to add anything. There's no job for that. Don't get tied up with what you want elsewhere. Focus on what you have and do the best job that you can, and everybody's going to pass judgment and say, look, so-and-so is excellent at what they do. And it commends them to be considered for something else or something with greater responsibility. So, Mr. Speaker, what are the growth pillars that we want us to look at? The first one is incentivizing the green transition and building a climate-resilient infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, we have to recognize, as I said, that the climate crisis is our reality. And we have to adapt to the fact that the world may not make 1.5, but as I said to the climate team yesterday, even if we were able to avoid 1.5, where we are now is already debilitating. And we have seen what it is to have the first hurricane in 66 years coming after a freak storm. We have seen what it is for parishes to be without groundwater, and for us to have now to move to look at alternative sources of water, whether it is atmospheric where you get it from the atmosphere, and there's a company here making water from the atmosphere now, and whether it is through desalination, as we already have had with the Ionics plant for the last 20 or so years. Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, I expect the Senior Minister to speak on energy, the renewable energy, and to update this Honourable House where we are. As I said, there were hiccups with respect to the regulatory environment. I believe that we're coming to the end of that now, and that we should be able to see a massive unleashing of execution of projects going forward, certainly from the beginning of next year. And Mr. Speaker, that depends in many instances on getting the regulation as to batteries correct, the regulation as to the feed-in tariffs for over 10 megawatts. The Honourable Minister will update this chamber on all of these. The government has traditionally had a weak capital works program under the last government. This government was able to boost it to about 4.2% of GDP in this year, and we're going to have to continue to boost it and stabilize, we hope, around 5% of GDP, which would mean somewhere between now and 2027, hovering between $500 to about $630 million a year in capital works projects. We have had to carry the majority of the weight during the period of time of COVID. But we are very, very clear that we need to bring back the private sector operating on all cylinders, private sector from the local, private sector in terms of foreign direct investment. And this plan speaks very clearly as to what the measurements have to be between what government must do, what the private sector must do, and what foreign direct investment must do with respect to getting it correct in the balance of foreign direct investment. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, the investment ratios and economic growth are very, very clearly set out in the medium-term macroeconomic framework, and at paragraphs 45 and 46 in this. You know, for us, 2006, 2007 reached pinnacles in this country that we want to exceed again. And in those days, Mr. Speaker, the public investment, the state, was about 4.4% of GDP. And the foreign direct investment at that time reached a high of 7.1%, and domestic private investment at about domestic private investment was at about 9.8%. There's a graph in here that all should look at because it tells the story. There's nothing that a picture tells, it speaks 1,000 words. And that graph is at paragraph 46. And it shows the ratios of public, private, and foreign investment in this country and what it was between 2006 and 2008 and what it literally descended into. And it also shows you where we want to take the country between now and 2030 with respect to the investment ratios in order to fuel growth. So as I said, the first pillar, yes, is in fact greening. The second pillar, and also the climate resilient infrastructure. We have just signed a loan with the Chinese government for the rehabilitation of the Scotland district roads. You heard me at the beginning of this speech talk about the difficulties that Barbadians will face in the Scotland district with the perpetual rain and flooding and the undermining, because we all know that the clay there is going to slip, regrettably, in ways that the rest of the island does not slip because of the coral stone and limestone infrastructure. Similarly, the South Coast and Bridgestone treatment plants are being looked at in terms of upgrades. We expect the South Coast treatment plant to move from just a filtration plant, which is what it is now, to one that allows for greater treatment, and that we use the treated water from both the South Coast and Bridgestone to be able to, one, help replenish the aquifers, and two, to use it for irrigation for agriculture as we set about as having food security as one of the key pillars of growth, as you will hear shortly. Similarly, we expect that we need to be able to leverage innovation in fighting climate and how we adapt to climate. And next week when I'm back, I want to be able to meet with all of the officials to establish the sandbox facility to address the regulatory and regulatory environment for manufacturing in a climate resilient manner. And what does that mean? You have the same companies, as I said, taking and making water from the air. But to do that, you also need a lot of power. And therefore, to get the regulation correct between what they can do and must do and cannot do is something that we need to sit down around a table and do, rather than making them wait for a long sequential process 2 years from now, and any first mover status that they have is licked up. This government must become familiar. We did it with we did a regulatory sandbox environment for fintech, and we must become accustomed to doing it for other areas of new innovation, such that regulation does not continue to be a noose around the necks of private investors in this country. Mr. Speaker, the second pillar is incentivizing low and middle income housing. And I expect the members for Christchurch West and St. George South to speak to these issues. This program has been a victim of the supply chain disruption, as well as the inward-looking policies of countries that don't afford transit visas to people who have to come in to do the training. But I have every confidence that we are on the cusp now of unlocking even more activity. There's been a lot, certainly more than the country has had for a while, with respect to housing at Lancaster, at Chancery Lane, at the city in Passage Road, almost all, and Pool in St. John. But Pool hasn't started yet. So that's just the services that have started. But on the first three that I called, the houses are out the ground. People are almost ready to occupy those houses. But as much as that has been a significant improvement on the previous decade, we now want to even ramp up much, much faster, because we have committed that we must build 10,000 houses in 5 years in this country, and I expect all hands on deck to do it. And let me just simply say, the notion that a police officer or teacher or a nurse can pay $25 a square foot for land first, then to build a house in this country, in my view, is not on. And that is why this government, because we've said ownership matters, has intervened into the market and has said, look, we must cap the price of land at $12 a square foot. We must contain the cost of the development of services, because if not, those services costs are passed on to the purchaser. And we must equally find ways of making the mortgages more affordable, and that is where the renewable energy platform and the HOPE concept came in, so that people who would not otherwise qualify for mortgages can so qualify, because you have the ability to assign the income from the roof or to benefit from the income from the roof in consideration as to what you can qualify for as a mortgage. Mr. Speaker, when I've taken the Secretary General of the United Nations past there, when I've taken the head of the IMF to there to visit, when we've taken all other visitors, people are amazed and applaud what the HOPE program can do in order to enfranchise tens of thousands of Barbadians, because we are not asking them to rely only on their salaries, but we are trying to make the cost of housing more affordable. And we have different points. We have one, and we saw it in these houses that the public have been able to go and visit, the one in Queen's Park, which we are working in cooperation with the Guyanese government and Guyanese Manufacturing Association in order to ensure that we have a house, good hardwood, good cement board, mixed together and capable of being assembled and hurricane resilient in short order, under 3 weeks. Obviously, it takes another 2-3 weeks to do the foundation, so that those are the quickest to market, and those are at the lowest end of the spectrum. And those range, from 650 square foot for a 2-bedroom, roughly 640 square foot for a 2-bedroom, to a 3-bedroom that is about 744. And we are managing those and the price points carefully. The first 350, we believe, and the minister will speak to it, should be available over the course of the next few months, and we will keep going after and after it because we intend to have a silent revolution in housing in this country. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we have the Chinese houses that are going up. Some are up. Anybody goes through Highgate Hall, you see the quads going up there. They're individual houses. And the reality is, Mr. Speaker, those too are hurricane resilient. Those we have had a pause on because of the difficulty in the supply chain and the difficulty in the transit visas. But those too, Mr. Speaker, in spite of those challenges, are equally going up. And we expect that we can have most of those challenges removed to see a quickening of the pace there. At Lancaster, the traditional mode of building, and at Chancery Lane, other contractors have come into the program, and they are proceeding with great speed. You would have heard me over the course of the last year speak at both of those sites, and we expect a replication of other projects in that same modality. Those tend to be for the higher end of the market, for middle income and upper middle income. Lancaster, I think we moved that from $2,000 to $5,000 because the Barbados Secondary Teachers Union and some other of the nurses, Barbados Nurses Association, both asked us to increase the threshold from $4,000 to $5,000 for the Lancaster type house. And there are other projects that are coming up. Why can't we keep the cost of land down? Mr. Speaker, because unlike the previous government who may have asked individuals who are in development for things, we ask individuals for planning gains. And the planning gains is land for ordinary Barbadians, and we get that land free. We get the land free. The land that's going at Lower Burney, 40 acres in the constituency of the Deputy Prime Minister, a planning gain. Planning gain at Bright Hall in St. Lucie. Planning gain in Christchurch. Mr. Speaker, when we do that and we add it also to the lands owned by government, land also at Ginger Works in St. Joseph in the Attorney General's constituency, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And that is how we've been able to keep the costs down, so that there will be people who will ask, how other people paying a lower price than some of the other houses that were selling out here for the longest time? It's just simply that the government has thought outside the box in order to deliver for people. I go further, Mr. Speaker. We have had to take a decision to maintain fiscal stability, because you can't do all of this and upset the fiscal apple cart, as you've heard me say earlier. But the Housing Credit Fund in Barbados has in over $80 million. We don't need all. There has to be a policy for those who can't afford a mortgage at all, because government must always be the provider of last resort for people who cannot, in spite of everything that they do. They may be physically challenged, they may be just incapable of getting out of the trap of poverty. In spite of all that they do, they can't get out. And we have determined that government must have a 30-year rent to own. Not rent in perpetuity, but a 30-year rent to own plan that will still make ownership attractive for those who want to aspire to it, but that will protect those who are incapable of getting there. And Mr. Speaker, in order for that, the National Housing Corporation will continue to manage the public estates, will continue to be the provider of those rent to own. But it comes to development, the National Housing Corporation, regrettably, is too bureaucratic and too incapable of moving with alacrity. And that is why, and it also will affect the fiscal situation, because it is a public statutory authority. We therefore will use the Hope Company to be able to do the development, but the National Housing will manage the flow of applicants, the National Housing will manage the public estates, the National Housing will manage the purchase of new units for persons in a 30-year rent to own. And the Hope will treat to this housing development in a commercial way, recognizing that the government has given it the policy framework that I've just announced to be able to keep the cost of housing down for teachers, for nurses, for policemen, for ordinary people, for gas station workers, for all kinds of people in this country. Because why, Mr. Speaker? Ownership matters. A family's relationship with a society changes when they have something to lose, when they have something at stake. And I learned this as a young lawyer practicing in the courts in Bridgestone. And I determined that if we ever have a chance, our duty is to make as many Barbadians homeowners in this country as is humanly possible. We are going to do our part in this relay race. The third pillar, Mr. Speaker, relates to the question of investing in skills training and education. But you don't need me to talk about that any long talk. You know that I have maintained for my entire career, mercifully I spent 7 years in the Ministry of Education, that we are literally capable of earning once we invest in our people. It is an investment, it is not an expenditure. We have made it a priority, as I said, to give people back free tertiary education in Barbados. And in truth and in fact, Mr. Speaker, the numbers that were depleted in 2013 to 2015-16 have more than recovered in terms of attendance at the university, and we will continue to see those numbers go up. We recognize as well that we had to put on pause the University College of Barbados, but we hope over the next 4 years that we can resume that trajectory, which will take in and bring about efficiencies to the Barbados Community College, the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute, and the Erdison Teachers Training College. Why? Because it makes no sense each of them having separate administrative and financial institutions replicating what each other is doing and not getting the efficiencies that would otherwise come from amalgamation. Why do you need a university college? It is not to compete with the University of the West Indies, but it is in truth and in fact to provide applied arts and applied science training in order to boost our labor market. Only last week, the Minister of Labor had in here one of the previous primary advisors for the government of India on labor market information systems, because we need once and for all to have proper labor market information and proper labor market coordination with our training and education programs. The education reform has to continue too, and I don't need to explain to others why, because we are still operating under a 1940s education system. Mr. Speaker, I am not going to speak again on the matters on which I spoke on Friday. Suffice it to say that this government in no way supports or will in any way encourage persons to take advantage of our children with age-inappropriate questioning or surveys. And this is not a matter that is a political issue. This is a technical matter that, regrettably, the ministry did not have an ethics review framework in place. We've said that it must be put in place, and I hope that what has happened in the past will never be repeated. But suffice it to say that you have to go back and ask how far and how long it's been happening, because people were never paying attention. And perhaps that is a bad thing, we acknowledge, but this did not happen and does not happen even at the level of the high technical levels in the ministry or indeed at the political level. But I will speak to that in a different way. The Construction Gateway Training Program has been critical to match the explosion in construction that we expect with the skills that we need. And even then, we are not sure that we will have sufficient of the specialized skills in order to complete some of the projects that have to be completed. I am happy that the National Transformation Initiative has been able to train and have over 26,000 courses in Coursera being pursued by Barbadians, as well as the citizenship course, which I want to commend to every Barbadian, old, young, not so old, not so young, to take, because it speaks to the culture of excellence, the ethos of responsibility, the things that will help us individually lift more weight to make Barbados a better place. Mr. Speaker, Pillar 4 is about preserving financial stability and mobilizing domestic savings for local investment. And Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that when the member for St. James Central speaks and St. James South, they will concentrate on this too, because this is about looking at using crowd financing platforms and the use of blockchain technology where we can, providing and attracting new low-cost providers of money transfers and payments. I expect the member for Christchurch East Central, who is going to wind up this debate for me, to also speak about the digital payments ecosystem and also the emergence of a new set of players within the financial sector, both in the traditional banking sector, but also in the new areas of digital payments. We have given a digital bank a license, and we expect it to start operating by the beginning of next year. And we have seen also players come out of Africa with the Z-Money and the remittances framework, which they can control digitally. Mr. Speaker, we expect also that much of what we are doing will complement the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which was proclaimed in May of this year, to enhance the functioning of the credit market by promoting accuracy, fairness, and privacy of personal information assembled by the credit reporting agencies. Why, Mr. Speaker? If you have good credit, people are going to take more of a chance on you. That is why we established the Trust Loan Program, because we recognized that there was a body of Barbadians that were being excluded from the financial system and who were not getting the benefit of access because of no credit information, and people were just not prepared to take a chance on them. And we said, no, we're going to trust you. We're going to lend up to $5,000 to you, and then if you pay it back, you will be eligible to borrow up to $10,000. Mr. Speaker, even in spite of COVID, we have been able, I'm told that the default for those have been still at manageable levels, and that speaks to the fact that people, especially poor people, pay their bills and value the fact that somebody took a chance on them. Now, we would have liked to put in $10 million every year, but obviously because of COVID, we've had to moderate the amounts in recent times, but I hope that we can increase from next year again the amounts that we put into the Trust Loan Program, because we are fervent in the belief that over an extended period of time, a revolving fund over 10 years of close to $100 million will make all the difference to nano businesses and micro businesses in this country, and individuals for whom nobody would take a chance to want $1,500 to go and buy some fruit and to be able to sell the fruit so that they can make a living for their family. All of these things matter. Mr. Speaker, the fifth pillar is making government an enabler to improve productivity, boost competitiveness in exports, and enhance service excellence. Mr. Speaker, we have to do better with the existing sectors that we have: tourism, manufacturing, agriculture, international business. And I expect each of the line ministers to speak to these issues. With respect to tourism, we had to put the best program in place over the last few years, but we will be doing more to renew our product. Barbados' product is aged. It needs investment. A lot of the hotels that exist now cannot pay our bills in the third decade of the 21st century. And we therefore need to be able to ensure that there are opportunities for the owners of those establishments to access affordable capital and to renew their product, even if it means demolishing and building and having greater density, and ensuring that not only can they earn more because of greater density, but they can command a higher average daily rate because of the renewed quality of the experience. We hope to work with the Africa Exim Bank in order to be able to make this a reality in terms of amplifying the source of funds for our tourism sector. But we have already of our own, as you know, in the course of COVID, put aside $200 million in the BEST program in order to be able to stabilize the dilapidation of the sector. And it was anchored on ensuring 80% of the salaries of your workers, boosting investments in greening, digitizing, and also ensuring that you create synergies between the tourism sector, the agricultural sector, the manufacturing sector, and the cultural sector. These cannot just be words. They have to be reflected in how hotels buy local art, in how hotels buy local food and work with the local farmers and meat and fish, and how hotels, in addition, work with the local manufacturing sector with the products that they produce here, so that you buy local rather than importing and using for the benefit of tourists a lot of things that are not produced, especially when we can get it. If there are issues of quality or consistency of supply, talk to us, that is where we come in. That is how we use the Industrial Credit Fund in order to be able to boost growth in those sectors. Mr. Speaker, with respect to similarly in manufacturing, this country is on the verge of us seeing the development of special economic zones and free zones. We do have some special economic zones, special development zones, as you know, that was passed when we were last in government, that allow you benefits where you develop in certain geographical districts. We want to go further and to be able to have free zones. The Parliament will have legislation come before it in the near future that treats to this issue. Similarly, you would hear us speaking to the Export Barbados. BIDC is effectively Export Barbados as well, and we also hope that we can set up an export-import financing facility. Some people may call it a bank. It may be a little ambitious to talk about a bank at this stage, but certainly an export-import financing facility. Mr. Speaker, the next pillar for growth is that which we've always been, establishing Barbados formally as a logistics hub. This country, regrettably, was the first port of call and critical key in the logistics of the supply of people. Right out there, families were separated outside the precincts of this Parliament. I know, Mr. Speaker, we know the measure of how low a society has gotten where fake news abounds now, day by day by day by day, instead of mercies. Instead of mercies, it's fake news. I could read that we were planning to put a statue of my grandfather in National Heroes Square. When? There have been 2 public engagements, not one. And the newspapers could call to ask for comment as if they had not been the ones carrying the public engagement. I have to ask, do you not read your own newspapers? Do you not check your own facts? But day by day by day, the Donald Trump culture has now permeated through the atmosphere. Well, day by day, we will answer. That's all. Because, as Richie Haynes used to say and Tom Adams used to say, if you give a lie a head start, you got hell to catch up with it. And the bottom line is, Mr. Speaker, this government, after the removal of Nelson's statue, consulted with the public as to what would be an appropriate type of memorial to go in that space. We, after consultation, settled that it would be a memorial to pay tribute to the family. And then we went public for designs for what that memorial should look like, giving the artists of this country the opportunity to design and sculpt, or however else they do it, what must go there. Now, I can only assume that people hear that a family go in there and assume it's my family. I never hear more madness than that. And anybody who knows me would know that they ain't got nothing to do with me. But let us go on. Logistics is Barbados' middle name. Geography matters. And geography has placed us as the most easterly country in the Caribbean. Geography has given us the bounty that there is nothing between us and Africa. And when this government said from day one in 2018, we are reclaiming our Atlantic destiny, it is because we understood the power of geography in building economic opportunities for our people. Not done in the immoral and scurrilous way that it was done for centuries by those who now want to have collective amnesia, but in a way that opens up South America, Central America, Africa, Europe, and the Caribbean. Many have heard me talked recently about the importance of northern Brazil and the fact that the states of Roraima and Amazonia are landlocked. The city Boa Vista in Roraima is an hour and a half, hour and 3/4 from Barbados, but it is 5.5, 6 hours down to Sao Paulo and to Rio de Janeiro. For them to get their produce out, they have to go across land, then across the Amazon River, and then across enough land again to come out on the Atlantic Ocean, and then still have to come all the way up. Whereas they can go through Guyana, which they do now if the road isn't flooded, because it's a cart road, and the Guyanese government is building proper infrastructure now. Part 1 has already started of the roads. The blocks have been, the bridges, I understand, will start soon. And then phase 2 has to be done. But separate from that, the volume of agricultural produce, the volume of livestock that can come out, and Barbados can be used as that logistics hub for agro-processing. We have more than 27 planes a week to the UK. We have almost the same amount to the US. In season, in the winter season, we have it to Europe. We need to make that year-round. And if we can concentrate on not just people, but also cargo, it makes the economics of the air transport more attractive and efficient for the investors. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, the port will continue to expand by having agreements with different ports in Africa and in this region. At some point, I would like to see the Bridgestone port investing in ports in Guyana and elsewhere in the region, because nothing says that we must keep all of our eggs in one basket. We have to diversify our investments. And we are, as I said, looking to be able to do a joint venture with respect to the management of the airport. We're not selling the port, we're not selling the airport, but we have to do JVs in order to be able to deal with exploiting the management of both facilities to be able to earn better for themselves, but to unlock economic activity and growth for the country by being those points through which logistics can appropriately and properly be planned. Mr. Speaker, I've said enough also to know that we must move beyond the North Atlantic countries. Barbados hosted the first Africa-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum ever with the Africa Exim Bank. And we had over 1,000 people here at the end of August, opening up the opportunities for what is possible. When banks start to go in each other's jurisdictions, the business people follow because they have the relationship with the banks. That is why Republic Bank in Ghana, with over 45 branches, allows Caribbean people to have the confidence when they go into Ghana that they know the bankers, they have access to them, and they can do good things and investments there. The African banks, there are at least 2 that are now before the central bank, looking to be able to establish in Barbados and hopefully wider, using Barbados as a headquarters for the wider Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, all of this work has come to something. When people saw us open the embassy in Accra and the embassy in the High Commission in Nairobi, they say, what are you doing? They want in Dubai. Because one, you can people embassies far more efficiently with technology at a far lower cost than before. But Barbados is a small island that can only survive with the cooperation of the rest of the world. Doesn't mean that we are subservient to the rest of the world, but we don't produce everything that we need to live. And therefore we have to create opportunities in order, and we must become the entrepot of the West in the same way that Singapore has been the entrepot of the East. I believe Barbados can do a successful job as a logistics hub. Mr. Speaker, Pillar 7 is about promoting diversification. If ever we knew that this has to be more than talk, because it's been talk for decades, is after COVID. When 90% of the people who would normally come here stopped coming because of the pandemic. And we then got to understand truly how pervasive tourism is in this society, how much we rely on it, both directly and indirectly. And that's a good thing. It's been good to us. Tourism is our business. Let's play our part. But it can't be the only business in town. And we have now to ensure that the renewable energy sector is a key productive sector. We have to ensure that the oil and gas, leaving out the oil part, but going for the gas, because gas will be the clean energy bridge, because even by 2050, the International Energy Agency expects that we will have 20% of the world's energy needs still coming from fossil fuels, but they hope predominantly natural gas. We want to see the back of coal. We want to see the back of heavy fuel. And Barbados has natural gas onshore, offshore, more offshore. We expect to have, in the next few weeks, an understanding of what the 3D seismic work that has been done by Woodside on the 2 blocks will reveal, and what our future is with that. And we have announced that we will, on the 1st of December, open a public bid with respect to other blocks for Barbados' offshore activity. And we will vest a number of blocks as we determined to do as far back as 2007, but it never happened in a cabinet decision, in the Barbados National Oil Company. And we may have, in this current world in which we live, allow that oil company to enter state partnerships with other state-owned companies across the world, recognizing that the window for the opportunity for the exploitation of natural gas is closing, but nevertheless, because, as I say often, all the time now, there has been a mismatch between capacity and commitments by those who are managing the climate crisis at the global level, and that we are all making the right commitments as small island developing states. But we can't get the supplies. We're constrained with the supply of electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. We're constrained with the supply of batteries because of the shortage of lithium. We're constrained in so many respects. And then we have no commitment on adaptation funds as was promised. And we have no commitment on loss and damage, although I'm hopeful that it will find its way onto the agenda in Egypt. But I'm sanguine that even if it does, at this late stage, we are unlikely to have the kind of agreement that makes sense. Because when all is said and done, if this was private law, as you know, Mr. Speaker, those who committed the tort would be held responsible. Those who committed the damage would be held responsible. But we live in a world where responsibility and action are just buzzwords for some. I commended the government of Denmark for taking the bold step of acknowledging that loss and damage is real. Because these Caribbean countries were promised in Paris that if you sign on to the agreement, the Warsaw Mechanism for Loss and Damage would become a reality in addition to what was then $100 billion. But we know that you need far more than that today to deal with adaptation. So, diversification of this economy from the traditional tourism, agriculture, manufacturing, and international business is not now the subject of a speech, but must be the reality of action on the ground if we are to insulate Barbadians again from future action. It means that the cultural industries, the heritage industry, must become real. That is why we are investing in the activities in the Heritage District in Newton, in order to be able to create a heritage district that will attract people from all over the world. Barbados has the second largest number of transatlantic slave records in the British world. Only Britain has more. And we need to establish an a genealogical research center, a monument to ensure that we appropriately honor those who went before and whose lives and whose living have caused us to be here. And then third, a museum that can not only teach, but also earn as it is teaching, to ensure that the world does not go back to slavery or forced migration. Why is Barbados the right place to do it? Because regrettably, Barbados was the place where the New World developed the institution of racism and slavery more than in any other similar 166 square miles. We were the ones that led to the slave codes in most of North America. This Parliament that we are members of, and we have a duty to correct it, and we have a duty to pay forward to future generations to show that the very institution that begat wickedness can be the institution that is the platform for empowerment and enfranchisement of the people who were the victims of that wickedness. Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, we have truly to maximize the potential for education and health tourism. Ross University came here as one of the first acts of this government. We've seen the benefits that it has brought to our economy. Regrettably, I hope that we will never see a repeat of what happened in the 1980s with the St. George's Medical University, when one Calypso came to shut it down from this country. Can you imagine how many thousands of jobs, how many hundreds of millions of dollars, how much opportunity Barbados would have had we not allowed a Calypso to shut down the possibility of a medical school? That is why I say part and parcel of the process of independence and development must be to have mature discussions in the interest of the majority and not at the benefit of a minority, a vocal minority, whose voices may be louder than most. The last pillar, Mr. Speaker, the last pillar is adopting open labor market policies to support stronger, resilient growth together with expanding the population base and improving productivity and competitiveness. Mr. Speaker, I've spoken over and over about the need for us to address the issue, and we are getting ready soon to be able to have the National Population Commission's report be distributed to the public and for the country to start the discussion as to how we avoid that national security and national threat of 1 in 2 people over the age of 65 occupying this country by the year 2050. The report shows clearly that we have not replaced our population since 1980. We've had elements of this discussion as we've discussed the reform of the National Insurance Scheme and the depletion in the numbers of contributors. But the truth is that our labor market is already smaller. And we will either apply our hearts to wisdom or we will suffer the consequences of a declining and depleted population. I leave you with this one point because of the lateness of the hour. 1, in 1950, Barbados had a population of just over 200,000. Bahamas and Belize were at about 80,000. Today, Bahamas and Belize are at about 400,000, and Barbados is struggling to come close to 300,000, 290, roughly, thousand. There was a time when Barbados' GDP per capita was healthy. Bahamas is now twice ours. The reality is, and for those who sit in the position that I do, we do not have enough people coming to work every day to build out this nation. And the people who are going to suffer are those who expect to get out of intergenerational poverty. The people who are going to suffer are those who just got out of it, but may be put back on a pathway down to pauperization. And whether we like it or not, all of us and got family who went to leave boat here and go to the United States of America. Why was the United States of America the powerhouse that it has been in the middle of the 20th century? Well, in the whole of the 20th century. It's because of migration. It's because of opening up. And the irony is that the very thing that made it strong is the very thing that is being used as a divisive weapon as it seeks now to stem what is clearly nascent decline of its civilization. And I've had to say to the American government that the decline of the American civilization is not simply about the United States of America. It is about all of the Americas. So we don't want it. But by the same token, things are happening that regrettably are leading you into difficulties. And we don't want to see that. But don't believe that we are pawns just to be pushed about and moved about, as we've said from 1966. We shall be friends of all and satellites of none. The bottom line, however, Mr. Speaker, is that Barbados must come to grips with how do we attract Barbadians back. We got enough, we got more Barbadians in population living outside than living on the rock. And therefore, how do we get their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren to come back as of right, and even the great-great ones, because some may want to identify with the exceptionalism of Barbados. And then beyond that, even with all of that, there may be a skill set that we continue to need in the country. How do we attract those people who have those skills? And then we need foreign direct investment. You heard me make the point. In order for Barbados to grow, it is the government investing, it is the local private sector investing, but you also need about 9% of GDP, which is probably about $900 million, $1 billion, to come from foreign direct investment as well. And when those people come, they need to be able to have something at stake. We will not do citizenship by investment. But this country, for the last 50 years, has recognized that skills and investment garner immigrant status. Nobody in the world today talks about immigrant status. They talk about residency. And I hope that the Minister of Home Affairs, therefore, will be looking by the end of this year to lay before the Parliament for discussion with the country a new immigration bill to help us take advantage of that. Similarly, our labor market policies, as I told you, we need to make sure that we get it right and the matching between what we have, what we need, and what we're preparing for. And then in terms of our national insurance and social security, well, that is a whole debate that the country has been engaged in for the last 2 months. And I expect that in the near future that we will be in a position to make some decisions after the most extensive consultation that has taken place by the National Insurance Department with not just members from within the NIS, but from a wide cross-section of people helping them at different levels to have that consultation. Mr. Speaker, all of this can only be done if we remember and anchor that this is a country for which social development and poverty eradication and ownership, promotion, remains at the core of who we are. And I can say definitively that irrespective of which political party is in office, mercifully thus far as a nation, that has been the binding instrument for us, the binding philosophy, I should say, for us. And this government not only is putting it there, but in everything that we have done, we have put people at the center of all that we do, because we understand that our mission, above all else, is not the measurements of fiscal deficits, is not the measurements of debt. All of these things are just measurements used to determine how successful we are in our mission to make our people prosperous, to make our people independent, to make our people conscious of the world in which they live, and to give back to each other. And that is why the reform of the welfare system that we inherited, that is Victorian in approach, has to happen. And there must be a holistic attitude to the eradication of poverty in this country, starting with asking for help. And the first help is by dealing with the family. You don't deal with individuals who have problems without dealing with the context of their family. And I expect the members from the city of Bridgestone and St. Michael South to speak to this in this debate. Because the reality is that growth is being promoted by them, for them. And when we leave the family of which they are a member, then we go to what we say we believe. And if we believe it, then we must practice it. That if we are our brothers and sisters' keeper, we have to be in a position to call on others. Not just the government to be the person, the entity providing support, but all of us know what it is informally. You see somebody, you work with somebody, you see that the child needs something, you're in a position to help, you help. You go to the supermarket, you buy 2 extra chickens, you buy some cleaning materials, you buy some other things for them. But we want to bring a formal structure to this now, because the government is saying that in the same way we fought COVID as a national effort, we can fight the elimination of poverty as a national effort. And we need families and churches and groups working with government to provide the support to those families. A lot of people try to make political hay because they ain't got nothing else to talk about. Political hay out of the minister talking about us going for the first 1,000 families who are vulnerable first. You have to start somewhere, Mr. Speaker. And invariably, those families have higher numbers in them. 7 and 8, 9 people living in spaces designed for 3 and 4 and 2 generations, and they got 3 and 4 generations living in the same house. People can't find space for privacy. People being and believing that they got to do things that they should not do to get a snap box. Mr. Speaker, this country of ours is better than that. This country of ours is greater than that. This country of ours knows how to pull together as one. And I want us to have the conversation, because government will do, must do, but government cannot be the end-all and the be-all. Because if that were the case, we wouldn't win. And if you believe that social workers parcel off here, and some there, and some there, and you're looking at 10 here, and 10 there, and 10 there, they can't fight the battle like that. But you are a previous social worker, Mr. Speaker, and you would know that when we add up all the social workers and the government's employed nationally, we're talking over 300 workers. And if we make every one of those social workers a first responder, we are now in a position to capture the data, to do the assessment, the diagnostic, and make sure that the appropriate entities, public or private, church or community group, sporting group, cultural group, that we work with those families. And if we set ourselves the target that as we move to become world class, that we minimize the level of poverty in this country to bring it as close to zero as possible, then, Mr. Speaker, we have run our leg of the relay, and we can say thank you, thank you, thank you. In the words of Timothy, we have run the course. And I hope that someone else then, not us, because self-praise is no praise, will say that we have been true patriots of our generation to this country. This is the mission that we have set ourselves. And Mr. Speaker, I've spoken longer than I wanted to, but I feel that this country must understand that what we are about is not anybody else's program. The Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program of 2022 builds on what we have achieved in the one of 2018. We set ourselves the target of debt and fiscal sustainability. Stop the bleeding, I used to say all the time. We set ourselves that target. We've largely achieved it. We're not quite out of the woods because of what has happened internationally. But in order to get out of the woods, we have to continue on the other things now that will trigger growth, that will have inclusive growth, because you can have jobless and growth that is exclusionary. But everything that we have done as a government speaks to carrying along our people. We could perhaps move faster than we're moving, but if we did, we would leave people on the sides of the roads. There are some that we will never be able to help because it is not ours to be able to repair disability in some instances, but we can minimize the impact of disability on them. It is not ours to be able to stop the climate that belongs to the world coming together and God. It is not ours to be able to control every aspect of the international capital markets from 166 square miles. But our voices can be heard for the reform of the international financial institutions and the Bretton Woods institutions that did not see us then because we didn't exist, and does not want to hear us sufficiently now when we say as a middle-income country, you cannot stop us from borrowing at concessional rates without hurting us, because you cannot use per capita income to determine eligibility, when tomorrow we can move from dealing with qualitative reform in education and curriculum reform and have to deal tomorrow with access to schools because a storm come over the country overnight and mash up half the schools in the country. That's what they faced in the Bahamas with Grand Bahama and Abaco. That's what we are at risk of every year. That's what the people of Pakistan are facing today in the apocalyptic floods. That's what the people on the western coast of Florida and all through Florida affected, knowing what it is not to be seen, not to be heard, and not to be felt. Well, we have learned it, known it, and lived it. But we also know how to rise above it. And rise above we shall. And rise above together. Because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, justice and solidarity are not a 1970s buzzword. Not by Peter Tosh, not by anybody. Justice is about fairness, as every child knows. It is timeless, it is universal. And solidarity for small people, the only way small people and small institutions get anywhere is by working together in solidarity. Mr. Speaker, I have confidence in the people of Barbados. I have confidence in the government of Barbados. And things may happen when we have to tweak, and when we have to change, and when we may have to even change course in part sometimes. But that's life. There's no human being in this world who don't at some point have to make a change as to the course they're taking or have to do some self-correcting mechanism. Because we are not divine. But we must be purposeful, we must be principled, we must be creative, and above all else, we must love each other. And if we do those things, Mr. Speaker, just as we were successful with BERT 2018, I have every confidence in believing that we shall be successful again with BERT 2022. Not because of the Prime Minister, not because of the government, not because of the public service or the cabinet, but because we as a people, not even everyone, but the majority of us have bought into the mission, have committed to the sacrifice, have committed to doing the things that we have to do, and have committed to the principles that allow love and caring and empathy to keep us together. Mr. Speaker, I ask that this resolution, which I shall now read, be adopted by this Parliament. Whereas the government of Barbados has determined that there should be a Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan 2022 to 23 to 2026 to 27, known as BERT 2022. And whereas BERT 2022 is the successor to BERT 2018 and lays out the government of Barbados' economic and financial program for the next 4 years, which is focused on achieving inclusive and sustainable growth while maintaining fiscal and debt sustainability. And whereas the general strategy of the BERT Plan 2022 is to preserve the gains achieved under BERT 2018 and advance the reforms which were delayed because of the COVID-19 global pandemic, this will be done with refocused priorities on policies aimed at generating sustainable and inclusive growth while building resilience through climate mitigation and adaptation. And whereas the government of Barbados will advance a growth strategy within the context of limited fiscal space and maintaining fiscal stability that includes structural reforms to promote economic diversification, strengthen competitiveness, and achieve a higher sustainable rate of economic growth that is private sector led and that will result in the enhancement of the economic well-being of every citizen. And whereas the growth strategy having as its 8 pillars, Pillar 1, incentivizing the green transition and building climate-resilient infrastructure. Pillar 2, incentivizing low and middle-income housing. Pillar 3, investing in skills training and education. Pillar 4, preserving financial stability and mobilizing domestic savings for local investment. Pillar 5, making government an enabler to improving productivity, boosting competitiveness in exports, and enhancing service excellence. Pillar 6, establishing Barbados as a logistics hub. Pillar 7, promoting diversification through new niche economic activities centered around a new high-skilled, knowledge-based economy that is more technologically advanced and carbon neutral and marine conscious. And Pillar 8, adopting open labor market policies to support stronger, resilient growth, together with expanding the population base and improving productivity and competitiveness. Be it resolved that this Parliament take note of and approve the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan 2022, financial year 2022-23 to 2026-27. Mr. Speaker, I commend this plan and this resolution. It does not capture everything, but it captures the essence of what we must do as a nation. I commend it to this Honourable Chamber for its support, its acclamation, but above all else, its implementation and execution. I'm obliged.
Wait a second. Yeah, reserved right to speak again.
Honourable for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the wonderful and historic opportunity to speak in this debate after our Prime Minister that so eruditely and succinctly presented all of the reasons why this program is so important at this time. And before I go any further, the Prime Minister said that Barbados is world class. And Barbados is world class also because our Prime Minister is world class. And our Prime Minister has shown to the world that just because you come from a small country and because you come from a small nation, that you cannot have big ideas and that you cannot understand and be able to speak to the world and the world listen and understand what you have to say. And the world considers what you have to say and it changes its trajectory appropriate to your ideas and what you have endured. So I first want to say I fully support BERT. We call it BERT 2022. I call it BERT 2.0. The first BERT, Mr. Speaker, was to protect the dollar. And we went through the program, followed all of the policies, did everything, passed every single test, and we protected the dollar to the point that the dollar is still at the peg at 2-to-1. This time, BERT is to put us on a trajectory to develop and improve this nation. I'll explain to you what I mean by that. Mr. Speaker, over 40 years of this country, over 40 years, the economy of Barbados has grown 24%. This is a fact. This is not pie in the sky. This is actual statistics provided, and I can use his name even although I didn't ask permission. I'm not using it in a pejorative manner. Professor Justin Robinson published and gave the listing of the growth of all of the nations over 40 years. And he showed that Barbados had only grown 24%. A small number in comparison to others. Belize, 168% over 40 years. St. Kitts, 152. Antigua, 129. St. Vincent, 121. Guyana, 120. Grenada, 115. St. Lucia, 113. Dominica, 96. Trinidad, 92. Bahamas, 63. Jamaica, 45. Barbados, 22%. Growth over 40 years. 1981 to 2021. And the reasons that he is given for that, and I fully appreciate, and it's so important to this debate, it is because Barbados does not respond well to economic shocks. It doesn't. We have a graph here which shows how Barbados responds and the time taken for Barbados to respond to economic shocks and what happens when we have an economic shock. And each dip here relates to an economic shock of the world. Be it the oil crisis, be it the Gulf War, be it the 9/11, be it the debt crisis, the Lehman Brothers debt crisis, or the pandemic as we're seeing now, Barbados does not respond well to economic shocks. And I can make this a document of the House, Mr. Speaker. It shows real GDP at constant national prices for Barbados. And the reason that it does not respond well to economic shocks is reasons of the past. What does that mean? That means that when we got economic shocks, our reserves were not in good stead. Our foreign exchange was not in good stead. We never had buildings built in a resilient way. We didn't have infrastructures designed to respond to shocks in a good and timely manner. Well, through this BERT program, through the access to having billions now, and for the first time, $3 billion in reserves, a record for this country. Having reserves so that we can respond well. Knowing that when we have a shock, when we have a problem, when we come to build back, we're going to build back better. And that is what we have to do in this nation. We have to understand that when it comes to shocks, when it comes to economic problems in this country, when it comes to hurricanes, when it comes to whatever happens in the international world, and we get the resultant negatives of it, that we have to put our shoulders to the wheel, we have to put our hands to the till, and we have to get Barbados back on track as quickly as possible. And that is where we have been falling down. And that is why this BERT program 2022 is so important. It is important because it puts money in reserve. It puts money in reserve. And you know, Mr. Speaker, if you have a fire, but you got some savings in your bank, you can respond to the fire. You can respond to the catastrophe because you have little savings that to the wherewithal to respond with. If you don't have anything in the savings, how could you respond? And this is part of what the BERT program is about. Putting Barbados on a better footing to be able to respond and respond quickly, responding quickly to economic shocks. And this is important, and this is exactly what this is about. And you know how you respond, Mr. Speaker? You know how we're going to respond? We're going to respond by growing this economy. Because the only way to get out of an economic crisis is by growth. Growth. And that is why growth is fundamental to the way that we respond to crises in this country. And, you know, for the first time in over 40 years, for the first time in over 40 years, Mr. Speaker, this Barbadian economy will grow by double digits. Every indicator is saying 10 point something, 11, 10.7. We're already 9 months into it, and the indicator is 10.4. For the first time in 40 years. 40 years. This is not political. This is not BLP, DLP. 40 years is both administrations. But it shows something that is very, very important. And it is that growth is dependent not only on government, not only on the civil service. Growth is dependent on the private sector, incentivizing the private sector, getting the private sector to become less risk averse. And whether we like it or not, we have to accept and understand that our private sector is risk averse in this nation. We're risk averse. We're not prepared to take on a challenge. We're not prepared to think outside the box. We're not prepared to do things differently or do new things. Let me talk about new things now. I can tell you something, right, Mr. Speaker? And I can make this a document in the House. Last time I spoke about the catastrophe fund, I talk about building better. I talked about the light and power. I talked about the light and power not using concrete poles. But this morning, could you imagine, Mr. Speaker, I opened my email to get a letter from the light and power, trying to suggest and give reasons why they have not been a company that's prepared to build resilience. And I make it a document in the house. Here, clerk, you can hold that. And you imagine, Mr. Speaker, that the Light and Power goes on to say that they made a corporate decision not to use concrete poles, and that's fine. That's up to them. And then to suggest that their corporate social responsibility, the sum of it was in 2013, they gave $145,000 to purchase beds at the QEH. Now, they did some other things. They had COVID support and donations for $250,000. They had funding of $200,000 for tourism development, and they donated some ham radios to a few people in the DM. A total of, they said they did $4 million in corporate social responsibility in 10 years. But, Mr. Speaker, but that can't be right. But they must forget or not. It can't be $4 million in 10 years. A company that makes hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions of dollars. To the point, Mr. Speaker, that they could pay dividends of $100 million to their entity, as was reported in the press. And in 10 years, could only give $4 million to the people of this country. $400,000 a year. But this dear letter ain't nothing I make up. It's something that they now send to me. To curse me about what I said was absolutely correct, that they were not good corporate citizens. And Mr. Speaker, for them to have to go back to giving $145,000 in beds in 2013. In 2013. Well, that's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, Mr. Speaker. And I'm amazed. But I ain't going to digress no more. Because they said they're going to publish the main press. Go ahead. Publish in the press. Because I will not resile from what I am saying in this honorable house. A company that is a monopoly has a social responsibility to the people of this country. Yes, they gave COVID support. A thank you for that. Yes, they gave some ham radios. A thank you for that. Yes, they gave some funding, $200,000 towards development, $200,000 over the 10 years. A thank you for that. But it is not enough. And we need more. Because all of the money the Light and Power makes is the money from the people of this country, and they've got to be prepared to give back to the people of this country. And I'm done with that. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in order for this country to get growth, there are several things that we have to do. Because, there's a saying, Mr. Speaker, that a rising tide raises all ships. So growth in this country means everybody grows. The individuals grow, the companies grow. But by extension, a lowering tide lowers all ships too. You know that. So if this country does not grow but falls down, but then all of the corporate entities will fall down. All of the people of this country will fall down. So we have to understand that we all in this together. We are all in it together. So all of you that could hear my voice, all of us working in this parliament, all of us working in this country, the private sector, the public sector, the civil service, the politicians, we are all in it together. Because divided we stand, and exactly, united we stand, and divided we fall. And that's why we are going to unite. We're a united party. We're going to make this a united country, and we're going to get this country going in terms of growth. So what are we going to do? We're going to incentivize the private sector for public investment and building climate-resilient infrastructure and in the green transition. We're going to invest in skills training and education, including online methods, towards enhancing the human resource capacity of this population. And I must tell you, I joined on to the National Transformation Initiative. I was trying to learn Spanish, and I'm still trying to learn it. We are going to make government an enabler to enhance productivity, competitiveness, and service excellence towards achieving higher local foreign direct investment in traditional economic sectors. All of these things, we're going to be promoting economic diversification through developing new niche sectors in high-skilled, knowledge-based economy with tech-savvy, carbon-neutral, marine-conscious, and fueled by innovation and creativity. All of these things are important because at the end of the day, the only way to get out of this problem is through growth. The Prime Minister said it. We need to grow this economy. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, part of the growing of this economy has been the work that the Prime Minister has been doing on the international stage. You know, sometimes we question the Prime Minister is going to COP. The Prime Minister was in Scotland. The Prime Minister is going to speak to Congress. But what does that do? That means that people who are interested in investing in this country are coming to us, asking us, we want to invest in this tourist attraction. We want to invest in this hotel development. We want to invest in doing a new plant to make a new type of battery, vanadium. The honourable member to my left knows that we had a meeting with a company who saw the Prime Minister, saw the wonderful effect that she's having on the world stage, and want to focus in Barbados in producing a plant to make vanadium, which is an alternative to lithium batteries. So opportunities are coming, and we have to look and find the best opportunity that fit exactly what we want to do to improve our economy and improve our country. And the way to improve it is through growth. Growth, 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 growth. You know, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister spoke about the housing revolution. And growth and housing are synonymous. The two greatest pillars that the growth of this economy are based on, this double-digit growth that we haven't had in 40 years, tourism and construction. Tourism, number one, construction, number two. You know, Mr. Speaker, we, National Housing Corporation, together with the ministry, contracted somebody to do some foundations for the house, for houses that we're doing. I think it was about a $140,000, $150,000 contract, whatever it was. You know, that contractor has reported to us that he cannot continue the contract, not because he's unable to do it, not because it is too small, but because he just cannot find the labor to do the construction. Because there is so much construction going on in this country now that there's a shortage of labor to do construction work. A shortage of labor. No wonder the construction gateway we are asking for and looking forward to getting so many of our young people trained in how to do tiling, how to do plumbing, how to do electrical installation, how to do PV installation, how to do wire steel bending, how to do boxing frames. All of those things, skilled labor. He is unable to find skilled labor. The point that he has so much construction going on that he has said he cannot continue that project because he can't find the skilled labor to be able to get the project executed in the time frame that we've asked him to do it. And that is what is happening. We need to get our people trained, because growth is not only dependent on finance, which is what the BERT program here is. Growth is also dependent on the idea, the design, the technology, the skilled labor, the opportunity, investment. All of these things come together for us to get growth in this country. And this growth trajectory is something that we will not resile from. We're not resigning from it. You know, Mr. Speaker, I have a few words for the people of Barbados. I think our greatest failing in this country is that we are often afraid to try. We're often afraid to try. And it's not that we don't want to try. I think actually it's the reverse. It's not that we're afraid to try, it's that we're afraid to fail. We're afraid to fail. Many times I put forward an idea and a suggestion. People can find all sorts of reasons why it should not be done. Be it the private sector, the public sector, people in this country are afraid to fail. But I read something recently which said essentially that those who are afraid to fail never achieve greatness. And it brought it home to me. And I'll use one other name, a friend of mine. In fact, his sister is my personal assistant, Patrick Husbands. I'm not going to use it in a pejorative way. Patrick Husbands is undoubtedly one of the greatest jockeys that Barbados has ever produced. Of course, from the great constituency of Christchurch West, but that's by the way. Well, there you are. Patrick Husbands, in fact, the Husbands family, they have the nephew, who I used to call Bubbles, seeing as a baby, is going to be even better than Patrick. I predict that. But anyway, if Patrick Husbands, and in fact he did, was to show you how many bones he has broken in his body on the road to becoming the best jockey in Barbados, you would be amazed. Almost every bone he has broken. Because Patrick Husbands was never afraid to fail. He was prepared if he fell, broke a bone, get back on the horse and go again. Get back on the horse and go again. Ask the top skateboarder of the world, same thing. Even, if I was to talk about Trump, even Donald Trump, Mr. Speaker, declared bankruptcy 4 times. Declared bankruptcy 4 times. To the point he said, I ain't got no money to pay my bills. I want protection from my creditors. 4 times. Declare bankruptcy. But you know what? Get back on the horse and try again. Barbadians, we are risk averse. We are not prepared to try. But I want a message that has to go out to Barbadians. I want to say to Barbadians, never, ever, ever be afraid to try. You know, I was an oral surgeon for 30 years. And Prime Minister said self-praise and praise, but I think I did a reasonable job for 30 years. People used to say that I was an expert. And I would tell them, you know how you become an expert? By making more mistakes than anybody else, but learning from those mistakes. Have I made mistakes? Of course. Have I learned from those mistakes? Of course. And that's how you become an expert. Learning from the mistakes. So don't tell me 30 years of experience, tell me 30 years of mistakes, but learning from them. So I want Barbadians to understand, never, ever, ever be afraid to try. That's one. We as a nation have to stop being risk averse. The same way how the banks are risk averse, the people have become risk averse. We cannot continue to be risk averse. We have to understand that you have to think outside the box. if we didn't think outside the box, we wouldn't be looking at the new ID card. We wouldn't be looking at digitization. We wouldn't be looking at new ways of doing things. We wouldn't be looking at the electric buses. Well, I heard the Prime Minister talk several times about the TAP program. The TAP program was an idea in my head, and the guy from APTO, I can't remember his name now, we worked together to form the TAP program. And in the beginning, Mr. Speaker, I had to go and beg people, have meetings. The Honourable Member for St. Lucie was there. I had to beg people, come and join the TAP program. People said, well, I ain't interested in that. We had to beg the taxi people. We had to beg the ZM people to come and join the TAP program. And you know what now? The TAP program is a success story for this country. It enfranchises people. The Prime Minister said it. You know, people, when I drive on the road and I see the electric buses, I say, nice, yeah, that's something that we as a government were able to do. But that's not what brings pride to my heart. What brings pride to my heart is seeing the little triangle TAP program. Because there's only 50 buses, but they've got hundreds of people in the TAP program, people that worked at the transport board for years, took their gratuity, took the money that they got from the transport board, buy a bus, and now can make something for their family and something that continues over time. It is generational opportunity for them. And I understand now there's an electric TAP bus as well in this country. That brings more pride to my heart than seeing the electric buses, because it's about enfranchising people. You know, I went to a memorial for my cousin, Bobby Clark, Sunday. And they had to show a clip of Bobby Clark. The Honourable Member for St. Michael East was there. The Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central was there. The Honourable Member for St. Michael South was there. Bobby Clark in that clip said, money ain't nothing. Having a shop or whatever, building or whatever, that ain't nothing. You know what's important? How much people you help. Show me how much people you help. That's what's important in this country. That's what's important in life. Show me how much people you help. But I feel I helped some people in the TAP program. I know I helped some people in my constituency. The Honourable Member saying he helped a lot of people too, but I didn't say which type of people, but he said he helped a lot of people too. Show me how much people you help. That's what's important in this country. And it was an eye-opener for me. So, Mr. Speaker, I lost my way in my speech a long time ago because I started to get a little emotional, as I do in this Honourable House from time to time. I don't know if it's because this letter upset me, and I had to say a few words, but you know, I will take on anybody. And I said that many times. I will take you on. Anybody. Anybody, anytime, anywhere. Win, lose, or draw, I will take you. So, my last few words, I certainly support this program. This program gives us an opportunity to build resilience. This program gives us an opportunity to put Barbados on even keel. This program gives us an opportunity to get ourselves to world class by getting growth, by getting tourism investment, by getting tourist attractions, by getting hotel investment, by getting corporate industrial investment, by using Barbados as a hub, as the Prime Minister said, bringing all of these things working together to improve this nation. And my last words before I take my seat to all of Barbados. Fortune favors the brave. I'm obliged.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 2:45 p.m.
The question is that this Honourable Chairman be suspended until 2:45 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This Honourable Chairman stands suspended until 2:45 p.m.